Yeah, well, I found it. I found out of the deck. But okay, just kidding. Hi, Next Nation. Thanks for having me. So, this is the name of my talk. And as you probably guessed it, we're going to be talking about making mobile apps with Nuxt today. So, first of all, let's have a look at some applications. So, this is an app we all have. This is my phone camera app. For Android users, you probably have a similar one. For iPhone users, you have the iPhone one. This is what we call a native app. What we mean by that, that it's developed using the phone-specific programming language. For Android, it's Java or Kotlin. For iOS, it's Swift or Objective-C. But you know that as developers, we don't like to code things twice. So what do we do in that case? Do we only code an iOS app and call it a day? Well, that doesn't really make sense from a marketing point of view, given that the market share for Android and iOS is more or less the same. So we'll need two apps. To answer that issue, we have Flutter, for example. It's a Dart-based framework developed by Google, and with it, we can develop apps for Android and iOS in one go. Google is using it for many of its applications, and here's the Philips Hue application that's also coded in Flutter. So, okay, Flutter and Dart, that's an option, but in this room, we're mostly JavaScript developers, aren't we? So in that case, you probably heard about React Native. React Native, like Flutter, also allows you to create apps for Android and iOS in one go. And here's a camera app made with React Native. But, well, I hear you. Now you might be thinking, cool, Lucy, that's quite some technologies you got there, but I came today to hear about Nuxt. And sure enough, so here's the third camera application. I made this one, and I made it with Nuxt. And it comes with an experimental UI, I know, and I know you're not here to talk about photography, but really the gist of this app is to take the focus on taking panoramic shots, hence the wide viewfinder. It also comes with control over the front camera sensor, like a real camera, all of that with smooth animations and everything. And what's interesting here is that bringing us back to mobile apps, is that none of those camera things are really associated with Nuxt or web development as a whole. Indeed, while we know we can make any kind of website with Vue and Nuxt, we also saw that we just can make also really capable mobile apps with them. So let's learn more about that today. But before, I'm Lucia Breur, and I'm working in France for Prismic, Headless CMS, as a developer experience engineer. And as you can tell, I've been a lot into cameras lately. Any kind of camera, really, like digital cameras, film cameras, and even weird ones, like this 20 or so years old Nokia phone that is quite an attention grabber at parties. But I also have a lot of fun shooting things with it. Like I used it to document the small core team retreat we had with Nuxt earlier this year in Bordeaux. And actually, I have it right here. So let's take a quick selfie with it together. I'll share it later on Twitter. So it's a bit weird because I don't have a front-facing screen, but in some practice, you can take pretty fine screen selfie with it. But okay, enough with the Nokia phone. Let's get back to my camera app and to some necessary background story. So I made this app to experiment the UI of a real camera prototype that is developed not by a big company, but by a small group of enthusiasts based in Japan. The project is called Keirin, and earlier this year, they held an event in Tokyo to showcase their work and their prototype. I really wanted to attend this event, but sadly, for various reasons, I couldn't. This meant I couldn't experience the prototype in my own hand, and this left me quite frustrated. And that's where I thought, what if instead I developed its UI for mobile apps? And that's how it started. That's how I embarked on a journey to build a mobile app. So nowadays, I'm not a mobile app developer. I've had some experience building some back to my freelance day. And one thing I knew from the get-go is that I didn't want to go native. I know it's quite some work and not an ecosystem I'm really familiar with these days. I wanted something JavaScript-based. In the JavaScript world, we have React Native, but I'm not a traitor. I won't write a single line of code of that unholy framework. if I were to write a mobile app with JavaScript, it would be with Vue and Nuxt, as everything should be. So, okay, then how do you build a mobile app with Nuxt? Well, before I give you some answer to that question, I want to make this talk a bit interactive. So I have these kinds of slides that will pop up now and then, and they allow me to prompt you all about something. And the first thing I want to prompt you about is, have you ever built a mobile app with Nuxt? So if you do, like, please take your phone and scan one of those QR code. Alternatively, if you have an old Nokia phone like I do, you can just follow one of those links above. Let me do it myself. Well, here we go. And just to accommodate stream delay, I'll be back to this slide in a few. So, okay, how do you build a mobile app with Nuxt? The idea when building a mobile app with Nuxt is that you want to end up with a mobile app, but you want the developer experience of it to feel as much like developing a Nuxt website. And to do so in the JavaScript world, we're blessed with Capacitor. And before we talk more about Capacitor, let's get back to my slides, and we can see you're answering right now, so I'm a bit in the future compared to you. But, well, we can see actually, like, I'm pleasantly surprised. There's a lot of people that did build mobile app with Nuxt before. So that's cool. You maybe already know about Capacitor, but in that case, please stay along. I'm sure there will be things for you to pick up. And for the majority of us that didn't build an app with Nuxt before, well, you'll learn a lot of things. Cool. So then what is Capacitor? Capacitor, it's a native runtime for building web native apps for Android, iOS, and more. But today, we'll only focus on Android and iOS. Also, some of you might know about Apache Cordova. It's, in a way, we can consider Capacitor as the modern successor of Cordova. But then, how does Capacitor work? Well, it works by rendering our UI inside a web view. And then it connects this UI to the native components of our phones through a bridge. And this is the main difference between Capacitor apps and other kind of apps. In a native apps, everything is rendered in native code. The UI is in it, the component logic is in it, and everything else native code. In a React Native app, the UI is compiled from React in a native code, but all the logic from React is still run in a JavaScript engine on this side. So React Native apps also have a similar bridge to Capacitor to connect the JavaScript engine and the logic to the native code. But getting back to Capacitor, let's be clear about it, like using a web view to render the UI, this has an impact on performances. But in my opinion, phones have gotten so much faster these days that this is way more than tolerable. I don't know about you, but I rarely complain about Chrome being slow on my phone. And on the brighter side, because our UI is installed inside a web view, this means we can benefit from everything we already know about web development to build our app. We can share code between our apps, like the mobile app and the web app. They can all have the same code and the code base and stuff like that. We can also share the same developer experience because we'll be able to develop our app in a browser with HMR or even on our phone directly and still with HMR. So, okay, that's the plan. We're going to build the next app and use Capacitor to turn it into a mobile app. We can get started with just a few commands. Basically, here we're initializing Capacitor itself, and then we are adding iOS and Android as export targets like this. From here, we can just craft our app with divs and spans as we'll have to. We can put a nice coat of CSS on it. And wait, how did I make anything with the camera of my phone if it's just a web app? Well, remember, earlier on, we said that Capacitor has a bridge between the web view and the native code of our phone. And we can leverage that bridge to ask for permissions, to fire up Toast, or to operate the camera. And how do we leverage that bridge? Well, we leverage that bridge through Capacitor plugins. So we have a lot of Nuxt developers in this room, don't we? Well, in Nuxt, we have something called Nuxt modules. We have the Tailwind CSS module, the Nuxt image module, a random one, the Prismic module, and many others. With Nuxt modules, you can extend your Nuxt app and add endless functionalities to it. On the Capacitor side, we have Capacitor plugins. With capacitor plugins, similarly to Nuxt module, we can extend our capacitor app to add endless native functionalities to it. And like Nuxt modules, there's a lot of capacitor plugins out there. Let's go through two examples. We have the capacitor dialog plugin, which allows you to prompt users for confirmation through native dialog. And a more abstract one, we have the capacitor file system plugin. That allows your app to basically read and save files to the file system of the mobile phone. But that's just two of them. And you have a complete list of all the available plugins on Capacitors documentation. And there's also a lot of community modules available out there on their organization. When building my mobile app, my camera app, I used many plugins. And of course, one of them had to be a camera plugin. So Capacitor does offer a camera plugin. When I first saw it, I was like, great. I use it, build my app, and call it a day. And that's what I did. I tried it. I started building things with it, but I quickly realized that I could only take basic pictures with it. Namely, it offered little to no control over the camera sensor, and I wanted control for the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture. And well, when I faced that, I thought, well, all right, no big deal. Let's see if I can contribute to the plugin to add the functionalities I want. So I went to its GitHub, and that's what a capacitor plugin looks like. First of all, we can see it's an NPM package. Capacitor plugins are distributed through NPM and are installed like any other NPM packages that you're used to. After all, that's part of why we picked capacitor to start with. Next, we have the Android and the iOS folders. Those folders hold the native code for Android. So inside it, we have Java or Kotlin, and iOS with Swift or Objective-C. And finally, we have the SRC folder. Inside it, we have a type definition file that defines the methods our plugin exposes. So we have a start method that will start a camera in the case of the camera plugin, a capture method to take a picture, and so on. That's the TypeScript part of the plugin. Now we'll do something a bit scary, but we'll be fine, trust me. We'll pick inside the Android folder. And I won't judge, but Java developers just love to nest their code under dozens of folders. But after digging for a bit, we'll find a camera preview file. And this file is the entry point of the capacitor plugin on the Android side. On the iOS side, we'll have a similar one, but nested under way less folder because it's not Java. So, well, picking inside this file, we'll notice that we have the same methods that were defined inside our definition file. We have the start method, capture method, and so on. And great, so from here, I think we're starting to have a pretty good idea of what a capacitor plugin looks like. And on my end, getting back to my problem, I wanted to add new features to this plugin. So I thought maybe I could add a few methods I wanted here and there and roll with it, right? Well, looking more deeply at the Android code, I learned that it's coded using the Android hardware camera plugin, which is a library developed by Android. So I went to Android documentation to learn more about it, and that's where I discovered that Android hardware camera does not provide fine-grained control over the phone camera sensor, sadly. And that makes sense. This library was introduced alongside Android's first release back in 2008. Since then, phone cameras have gotten immensely more capable, and explains the lack of features of this first library, but that's also why people at Android introduced in 2014 Android Hardware Camera 2 as a more modern and future-proof camera library for Android. But because it's handling more complex cameras, this meant it also has an entirely different API. And this meant for me that I couldn't just use it inside the camera plugin without writing the whole code base. So it was not possible to contribute the features I wanted to the capacitor camera plugin without rewriting everything on the Android side, which is not something I felt confident doing. At that point, I really thought I had reached a dead end. So, well, like making the camera app I wanted with Nuxt and capacitor was not possible. So I even thought about breaking my oath and started to look at React Native. So React Native, like Capacitor, it has its own plugin ecosystem, and there are some camera plugins inside it. But so I tried them, And I quickly realized that also React Native camera plugins had the very same limitations that capacitor camera plugins had. They were either relying on the old Android hardware camera library or offered too limited of an APIs. So that really seemed like a dead end in my journey of making a camera app with JavaScript as a whole, unless I made my own capacitor camera plugin. So I know I've been a really good French citizen at complaining about everything, like no plugins are suited to my liking, like there's issues everywhere. So let's stop the complaint here and discuss about how to make capacitor plugins of ours. But before, another quick question break. This time I want to ask you, do you build or use in-house packages at your company or for yourself? NPM packages or any kind of packages really? Maybe you have like an internal UI kit, an internal authentication library, or some library, a collection of animation helpers that you use at your job, or maybe that you build at your job. So please grab your phone again, scan on one of those QR code, or just follow one of those links, and this will help me frame better the next part of this talk. And once again, I'll be back to it in a few to accommodate the stream delay. So then, how do you build a capacitor plugin? And I know this is getting a bit niche in the talk, like we won't be talking about Java development or anything. I just focus on what's important for everyone to know here. So we can get started with capacitor plugins with this command. And after running it and answering through prompts, we'll end up with a project like that. And I don't know, but like we're already familiar with that project structures, as it's the same that we saw before. Like it's still an NPM package. We still have the SRC folder and the Android and iOS folders or the native code for our plugin. So from here, we'll be able to develop our plugin. And getting back to our poll from before, well, this time we can see that like a majority of us actually use and build in-house packages at our job at our company. You may be still answering. Thank you all, everyone, for participating, by the way. And well, this is exactly what we're doing here. We're building a plugin to suit our very need when building a mobile app with Nuxt, and that's what we're doing. So that's what I did on my end. I ran the command from before, and from here I started to work on Capacitor Camera 2, which is my capacitor plugin for operating cameras with Android, except that it's now powered by Android hardware Camera 2. It's only for Android. The reason for that is that I'm an Android user and I don't have an iPhone to test it with. Remember, this is just a side project of mine. And also, it's written in Java. Well, it's more common these days to use Kotlin for Android development, but in my case, I worked at a bank before. We are using Java there, so I was more at ease with Java, so I went with Java. I didn't want to learn a whole new language for that. And finally, and more importantly, this plugin has a broader API for controlling the phone camera, which is what I was after to start with. So I know we're talking a lot about native things here, but hear me out. What's great about capacitor plugins is that sure, you have to write some native code, but that native code is greatly reduced in scope thanks to capacitor plugin. And one thing that I really want to emphasize for this talk is that not everyone in the team has to be familiar with plugin development and native code. Only a few has to be, and this allows you to still concentrate most of your effort on building the next app itself. On my end, I started to have a really capable camera plugin with manual and automatic mode. It could take pictures, generate thumbnail, and manage EXIFs data, and even add picture-in-picture support. On the Nuxt side, I was able to use it for simple composable use camera, and everything else was a breeze. From here, I was able to complete the first version of my camera app, and I was really happy with it, so I sent it to the team in Tokyo working on the real camera prototype. And I guess they were pretty happy to see the results and experience their prototype in the form factor of a mobile app. More on that in a few. So, okay, I know we're talking about a lot of things, but one thing I want to make sure in this talk is that here, like I want to acknowledge that like we won't be all making camera apps here. But my story is just an example. We can make all kinds of apps with Nuxt and Capacitor. We can make mail apps, service apps, e-commerce apps, and so on. And one thing that is pretty common when making mobile apps that we want them to have a native look and feel. Indeed, designers won't use material design on iOS, and likewise, they will avoid to use iOS design on Android because this feels odd. So we saw before that we have the dialog plugins that allows us to ask to open native dialog and ask users for confirmation. But what if we want our whole UI or part of it to have a native look and feel? Well, in that case, Capacitor got you covered with Ionic. Ionic is a huge library of components, but it's more than that because each component Ionic provides you with will render differently based on the platform it's running on. That means that, for example, an action sheet component will render like an action sheet, an iOS action sheet on iOS, and like an Android action sheet on Android. This is the same component. More than that, there's also a comprehensive theming API for Ionic that allows you to customize those components and also use your own background color so everything stays on brand. So you'll think you want to use Ionic in your project. In that case, look no further because at Nuxt, we have a Nuxt module for that. It's called Nuxt Ionic. It's maintained by Daniel Rowe, and you can get started with it with just one command, as with every Nuxt module out there. You can learn more about all of that at ionic.nuxtjs.org, but no worries, I will share with you all the links later on. So, all right, that was quite a lot of things we discussed about. We talked about Capacitor plugins, and Ionic. So let's answer a question from the start. Can Nuxt make great mobile apps? Well, yes, absolutely. It's all made possible by Capacitor. It's a native runtime for building web-native apps for Android, iOS, and more. It works by leveraging a web view to render our code, and we admitted that this is less performant than running fully native code, but that with the performances our phone have nowadays, this is more than acceptable. On the brighter side, because of that, we can benefit from everything we already know about web development to build our app. We can share code between our web app and our mobile app and have the same developer experience for building them. When we want to perform native operation from our mobile app, Capacitor plugins are connected to the native runtime of our phones through a bridge, and we can leverage that bridge through Capacitor plugins. They are comparable to Nuxt modules in a way, and there's a lot of first-party Capacitor plugins available out there, and the community also has made a lot of them. Finally, plugins are just packages, so you already know to install them and how to use them. Next, while building really specific applications like me with my camera app, there might not be already a plugin for your use case. In that case, it's not a dead end. You can write your own plugins. And doing so is great because it allows you to access any native component you can think of. All of that with a greatly reduced scope when it comes to the native code you have to write. And one thing that I want to emphasize again here is that not everyone in the team has to be familiar with plugin development and native code. Only a few people have to be. Finally, do you want your app to have the look and feel of Android and iOS? In that case, we have Ionic for you. It's a large library of customizable components that will render differently based on the platform they are running on. Using Nuxt? Well, we have Nuxt Ionic for you, and you can get started with it with just one command. So that's all for me. On my end, I'll be heading to Japan next year to meet the team behind the real camera, my camera app portrait, and maybe we'll hack a few things together. You can find everything about this talk, slides, the source code, and more at lucy.thread/nextnation. Thank you so much for having me.
Yay, Lucy. Thank you. All right. We do have a few questions for you. Is Capacitor such a powerful as Flutter in terms of final app performance?
Okay. I believe Flutter is fully compiled. So in a way, you end up with maybe something that's a bit more performant in Flutter. But Flutter is still not native code, so there might be limitations with it regarding like what you can do and everything, just like I experienced myself with like interacting with the camera. Like you might have to write some like connectors to the native components of the phone. But I believe like Flutter will ultimately be faster because it's not using a web view fully to render your application. But once again, I want to emphasize it. Like I think in many cases, like the web view performances are really fine for many apps. And there's a lot of benefits to using this approach, I believe.
Thank you. Okay. How does adding multiple capacitor plugins affect the loading time of a website? Does the initialization of the plugins impact the initial load or only come into effect later in the app's lifecycle?
Okay, so I haven't digged really deeply into that, but I've used a ton of plugin on my application like that I use like for my camera app, and I didn't feel any issue with that. One thing that is to know is like when you interact with capacitor plugins, because it has to go through this bridge to talk to the native components of your phone, everything is happening asynchronously. So I believe like it doesn't add like much like overhead to your application, because you just call them when you need them, and it's not something that has to fully load before. And most of the capacitor plugins are in native code anyway, as we just saw, like with Java, Kotlin, or Swift and Objective-C on the iOS side. And so this should be like as performant as any native application.
Thank you. And last question. Is there a timeline for a stable 1.0 version of Nuxt.js
Wow, so
Ionic?
that's
Wow.
an excellent question to which I don't have the answer. But one great thing is that Daniel is up on stage in 30 minutes, so I'm sure he will have the answer to that.
We'll ask
Sorry about
then. We'll ask then.
sorry. Yeah, but I'll make sure to ask Daniel anyway and to share the answer.
Oh, and we got one more question added. Um, what about a watch app for Apple Watch? Would you code the watch part of the app in iOS? It's called Tiger. Wow, Target. It clearly says Target with native code, then similar to a plugin, communicate with the main capacitor app.
Well, you can code like Apple Watch applet, like a app with capacitor. I believe there's even like a capacitor plugin to do like things with the Apple Watch stuff. So like you should be able to do that in capacitor and to even maybe have Nuxt running on your Apple Watch, which would be quite interesting. Yeah, I think that's possible.
Cool. And then also for a native mobile app, what are the advantages of using Nuxt versus Vue?
Well, like when you're using Nuxt to build your native app, mobile native app, like you bring along like everything like Nuxt provides you with. And one of the big part of that is a great developer experience and ecosystem that comes around Nuxt. So like you have all the routing, like you have the Nuxt Ionic module that we talked about. Like all of that like comes through and like gives you like a really nice developer experience. And what is really awesome with Nuxt that Nuxt like can scale down or scale up according to your usage. Like if you just have a really simple like one-page app, like I do with my camera app, like Nuxt is able to scale down, like give me the most of its performances like for a really simple app. Whereas like if you start to have like a really big app with routing and everything, Nuxt will also like scale up and provides you and empower you like for your journey of being a big mobile app with it. Whereas with Vue, you'll have like just Vue.js alone and maybe Vite. You'll have to like figure out a lot of those things for yourself and maybe make a lot of mistakes along the way. So really Nuxt is more like a safety net in a way, like because it will, more than just a framework, it will support you in your journey of building that mobile app.
Thank you. All right, Lucy, that is the end of our questions. Thank you so much for joining
Oh,
us.
thanks. Nice.
All right, y'all. Up next, quick message from our sponsors for CK Editor, our diamond sponsor. Thank you again. CK Editor 5 is a fully customizable, collaborative, rich text editor that integrates smoothly with popular frameworks like Vue.js, React, and Angular. Designed to enhance content creation, it provides an exceptional experience for editing documents, web pages, and diverse content types, all within a singular intuitive environment. With over 100 plugins, CK Editor 5 adapts to fit any workflow so you can build exactly what your content creation process needs. Despite its extensive flexibility, CK Editor remains straightforward to configure and set up using Builder. So, thank you again, CK Builder. And up next, we have Dan Pastori. Dan will share his insights on Nuxt content, the ultimate tool for blogging and documentation. Dan is a full stack developer at 521 Dimensions with a flair for creating user friendly applications. When he's not coding, he loves exploring the outdoors and discovering new coffee roasts. Join us as he reveals on how to harness Nuxt content for your project. Welcome to the stage, Dan.
Hi, Nuxt Nation. Great to see you. Today, we're going to be talking about Nuxt content, the ultimate tool for blogging and documentation. We use it literally for everything. We use it for documentation sites, we use it for landing pages, and we're going to do a quick overview of Nuxt content, kind of like what it provides, the ways you can use it. And then at the end, I'll do a small demo of a site that we already have built using Nuxt content so you can see how it's structured, and I'll be able to answer any questions. It's a smaller module with a lot of power. So who am I? I am a full stack developer at 521 Dimensions, which is our client-facing software company. We touch a lot of different frameworks. We use Nuxt a lot for our documentation, and we use a variety of other tools as well. But I also contribute as an open source developer with server side up. So that's if you've probably seen anything on the internet, it's probably from server side up. We do a lot of blogging. We do a lot of open source tools. We even build some SaaS products. And it's really like a passion for what we do too. It really expresses what we have, and almost all of our open source sites that we have running on server side up use Nuxt content. And hopefully within the next couple months, server side up itself will be using Nuxt content. It's a much bigger site that's been around for 15 years. And it just requires a little bit more transition, but we're excited to get it taken care of. Also, I'm a coffee enthusiast, like a big time coffee enthusiast. So while I'm coding, I always try to find something rare and unique that I can enjoy, kind of like sparks my creativity. One of the apps that we built using Nuxt is a coffee finder, but we'll leave that by the wayside for now and focus more on Nuxt content. Okay, so Nuxt content, let's dive in. What is Nuxt content? It's an officially supported Nuxt module. So what you can get with that is it's supported by the Nuxt team. You know, it's well designed. It's going to work with your Nuxt install. It's going to have great documentation, great developer experience, and great support throughout the Nuxt content version 1 all the way up to version 2, in which I hear version 3 is coming out, which I'm excited to watch the talk on tomorrow. Everything that Nuxt content has available is easily documented. So what it does is Nuxt content, the module, adds a content data layer. So it allows you to write content in Markdown, use YAML for front matter, which we'll dive into soon, to help describe your content, and parse other normal, easier to read formats from the content directory within your Nuxt install. So when you install Nuxt content, you'll get a content directory, and you can have that directory drive the URL structure and how your Nuxt content install works. And there's two ways to use Nuxt content within your Nuxt install: as a standalone or just module as a part of a greater app, or as a document, what's called document-driven mode, which relies heavily on the form of your content. So how we use Nuxt content. We use Nuxt content, like I mentioned, for all of our marketing and documentation sites for server side up. These are 3 of the examples that we have running live that you can visit right now that are using Nuxt content. Bugflow is a SaaS product, and that's what we'll be using at the end to kind of go through how we do marketing with Nuxt content. It's a little bit more complicated than some of the other open source documentation sites that we have. The GetSpin Pro is a simpler version. It's a landing page for a server hosting or a quick server management platform that we run. And then we also have Financial Freedom, which is an open source app, also using Nuxt content. There's a little more style on the homepage of that. So I just wanted to show these 3 examples because that also shows the power of Nuxt content. When you're designing your site, you have full control over the style. You can either use the style that was provided by Nuxt, their theme, or you can totally run with it and do whatever you think is best. But I mentioned earlier, there are 2 modes to install to use Nuxt content. Document-driven mode and an quote-unquote in-app install, which is like another module, a part of your Nuxt app. So if you want one code base that contains your functionality, that contains your your app, your authentication, everything that goes with the app, and also your marketing site, you can install Nuxt content to work right along with that, and you can run it all from one code base. Or you can do document-driven mode. So document-driven mode is where what we tend to use the most. It really revolves around the structure of your content. And you can then just start writing content. It live upload or updates in the preview, and you can see how it works. I mean, both of them will live update, but like when you're doing the document-driven mode, it's really, when you structure your content, you're structuring your site. It's pretty cool, and that's what I almost want to focus on a little bit. So document-driven mode, like I mentioned, is built around your content. The content directory determines the structure of your site. If you nest a folder underneath another folder, you're going to have a URL that's going to be your markdown file. You can organize your markdown files in certain ways that, like, if you put a 1 in front of it, it'll appear first in your in your listing. You can query based off of different front matter. It's pretty awesome to use. Makes heavy use of markdown components. So when you're doing a document-driven site, you can design a layout which is like a standard format, like maybe your article or maybe your blog post has a certain layout, or maybe a listing has a certain layout. But you can also embed functionality into your content using markdown components. I'll give an example, and then I'll show some at the end of how markdown components work. And the last major point of document-driven mode is it's pretty much just you write the content and it renders as you write, which is pretty impressive. It just makes for a really smooth experience. It helps you focus on the content without having to worry about all these little intricacies to make it work. So that's one of the big reasons why we're moving server-side up, which is on WordPress right now, the main blog, to Nuxt content, because we can quickly generate content without having to worry about all these other settings. With the module install, you like to think of it as more of like a piece to a bigger puzzle. You get a little bit of control over, like, which queries you can run. You can run certain queries to get the content you want in the order that you want it. It's more flexible in some ways. You can like incorporate content pieces into your app as well, which is pretty slick. And you can make use of the predefined components such as content doc and the content renderer, which we'll touch on here soon. And those are super helpful components provided by the Nuxt content module. So when to use document-driven mode? To be honest, this is our preferred method. I like to think of the choice to use document-driven mode. You have like pretty much 3 great examples, and then anywhere where content is king. So documentation sites are great for document-driven mode. There's not a lot of user interaction. There's not a lot of things that you need to extend or maybe require authentication or maybe compute data. It's focused heavily around your content. Same with blogs. Blogs are they're meant to be focused on content. They can, you don't have to have too much functionality. You can add that functionality with markdown components when needed, but it's mainly focused on your content. And same with landing pages. You need a simple site with a couple pages that describe your product. The Nuxt content module and document-driven mode is the way to go. So the rule of thumb is anywhere where content is king and you want to like quickly generate content and not worry about, writing all your queries on every page or like making individual modules, document mode is the way to go. So let's kind of touch through a few of the main components of the Nuxt content module, and when you understand these pieces, you'll be on your way. So when you're writing when you're writing content using Nuxt content module, you're probably parsing Markdown. Well, how do you extend data that you need? Like if you come from a WordPress background, there could be advanced custom fields where you add certain pieces of data that are metadata to your blog or documentation content. Well, Nuxt content has you covered because you can do front matter. It's custom metadata, low code, and queryable. So when we look at this code, this is actual front matter from a blog post on our Bugflow site. And all it is a bunch of metadata. All fields in here are queryable and dynamic. So when I'm writing front matter, which will end up being my piece of content, the front matter lives on top of your Markdown file and is written in YAML, which is yet another markup language. And who would have guessed? And when you write your content, your metadata in YAML, you can query that content, and you can also use it within any of the components where your page data is present. So we use a lot of querying on some of our other sites to order by like the updated at or the published at. One major component is the blog or the layout, which you can do a blog layout or you can do a documentation layout. This all just describes the content and how it should be displayed. In this example, we define our OG image explicitly, but there's another cool plugin that we always add, and I'll go through some of these plugins to help you really build out your Nuxt content site that will generate that OG image. So when you look at like a front matter query and you're querying content, you can see right here, this is just a very simple way to do a query, and we're just sorting by the published at date. So look at the newest posts first. Super helpful that you can do that all within Nuxt content. The query is really straightforward. It's very SQL type feel to it, and you don't have to worry about all the other little intricacies that come with other content management platforms. So within Nuxt content, if you're going to add functionality to a piece of like Markdown, or say if you want like a contact form or a little tool built within your your content piece, you'd use a Markdown component. So Markdown components are actually view components, fully functional, that you can add all the functionality to integrate with Nuxt, to integrate with right in Vue, right within your content piece. I find these heavily used within document-driven mode, because it's one way, like if you're focusing solely on the content and outside of your layout and you want to add like a contact form right in the middle or a newsletter sign up of your content, or an example it will provide is a code panel which renders clean highlighted code, you would add a Markdown component. And the Markdown component also just adds the features of, it's a simple way to add, or a format to add the content or your component to your content. So if you take a look, this is our view component. So this is a code panel, and we use this in all of our documentation. And this allows us to provide code snippets. So it looks, if you're coming from Vue, this looks like a normal view component, something that you would use in Nuxt. But the interesting part is there's a content slot. So whatever you put in to that content slot, your highlighted code will be rendered. So when we go into our actual piece of content, we are referencing our code panel component. We're giving it the properties, which if we jump back here, the label, you can see right here is your properties. We can pass that through YAML, and then in between our Markdown component, we have the actual content of or the code that we want to render. So when we go in and add this code snippet, it's a nice highlighted piece of code. We have all the Tailwind styles, which I took out because otherwise it'd be 100 lines of code. But we have nice, beautiful Tailwind styles that match the theming of our site. and we can quickly add it to our markdown content. It's pretty slick on how this works. And once you get the hang of it, it really allows you to add some amazing functionality. Another piece I want to touch on is some of the provided components that you get when you install the Nuxt content module. And these are pretty straightforward. It's just nice to know like what they have, kind of get exposed to it, and we'll show a little bit of these as well. So we have a content doc component. What this does is it shows the content at the URL provided. So if you structure your content and you have blog/hello world, this will query the hello world content from your markdown file and render it within inside that component. We also have content list. So this will find all the content within a certain directory or within a certain structure. And it's great to build like navigation, or it's great to build like search results or indexes. You can just pass a bunch of data to the content list, and you can render it kind of like loop over and make a list of links. Next up, we have content query. So content query component is kind of unique. So there's two ways to query your content within Nuxt content. One is using a composable, which is super helpful if you have like more user interaction. But you can also pass the content query. You can pass query parameters to the content query component and actually run all of your querying within the component itself. It's pretty slick. We use it for search results on one of our open source sites, where if the search results or the search query is present in the URL, we can pass that directly to the content query component and list over all the results. So how do you go live with Nuxt content? There's two different types. And if you're familiar with Nuxt, there's also an SPA mode. When SPA is a single page app mode, as of Nuxt content version 2, it's not recommended to use SPA mode because there's server-side rendering that happens with the actual content. So you want to either enable server-side rendering mode, or you can do static site generation. Static site generation will go through and render all of your routes and create one big static chunk of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and you can deploy it anywhere, Netlify, Vercel, or Cloudflare. Personally, we use Cloudflare, and we use it for all of our open source sites. What's great about Nuxt content is there's a bunch of helpful modules that really just take your Nuxt content install to the next level. We're going to touch on 3 of these, and then we'll jump over to a document-driven code demo. So the one I really recommend is the Nuxt OG image. It is amazing. It will automatically generate an OG image based on the parameters that you pass in, and they look gorgeous. So if you go to any of our sites, the OG images will be generated through this plugin. Supports all major sizes for social networks, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, and it has an amazing DevTools integration. So if you're using the Nuxt DevTools, which is awesome to begin with, the integration with the Nuxt OG image is even more incredible. You can preview the OG image right within your DevTools, see how it's generating, make any tweaks, and it's easily themable. You can literally style the OG image based off of the CSS and style that you want. You can add pictures and move them around, and it dynamically takes a header, the H1 tag, or whatever you pass to it, and generates a nice OG image. Really is icing on the cake for Nuxt content installs. Next, we have Nuxt Social Share. This is a really simple way to add social sharing links to all of your sites, all of the pages within your Nuxt content site. They come themable, so you can pass along what you'd like the default share to be, and style it the way that matches your content, or you can use the predefined social links as they come with. And then finally, Nuxt Image, which is another first-party supported Nuxt module. What's great about this is you can easily host your images using your Nuxt content install on CDN, so you can quickly optimize images so they load snappy. You can use multiple cloud providers. You can store them wherever you're comfortable with. You can easily make responsive image generation, so you're always loading the right image per the screen size. And what's wild is you can use future-proof your images. So if you're using WebP or any of these other kind of cutting edge, I guess it's not cutting edge these days, but any newer format that really speeds up your site, helps you get found by Google, Nuxt Image will help you do that. So with that being said, I'm going to jump into a quick document-driven code demo. And with this, we're going to just show a little bit of a live install of Nuxt content, where you can find code, and how we use it. And I'm not going to do this live because those never go right. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to close this, and I already have it fired up. So right now, you should see on the screen, I have Bugflow. Bugflow is our SaaS product that the entire marketing site on here is using Nuxt content. So with this, we have a couple different sections, and this shows the flexibility of Nuxt content. We have a blog section, we have a changelog section, and we have a documentation section. One thing I want to point out about like the documentation sections and the way that Nuxt content is loaded is you can put numbers before each of these, each of your markdown files, and that will be the order that they render when you query the content. So if we jump over to the help and documentation section, you can number your folder. So number 1 is getting started, and we have a nice component that loads that. Number 3, collecting feedback. And then we have integrations, community, and get help. So you can easily organize your content within Nuxt content by just using a numbering-based system. You can also add, if you jump in here, you can see you're just writing markdown for how all of these features, or all the content gets rendered. Is a nice, you just write it in markdown. There's no special like editor. It really makes it really easy to quickly generate content. And when you have a home page, this is a shorthand way of using your markdown components. So I have a couple markdown components on our home page, and this is completely document driven. So this is how I would just make one markdown page, or one markdown piece of content, and include the markdown components in here. And I can style those components up here within the content section. So if we jump up to home, top, fold, and we do like global header, we can really nest these components and make them like, beautiful view code, and then just quickly integrate them into your Nuxt content install. What's really awesome is this is Nuxt 2, and I've seen a little bit of the preview for Nuxt content version 2. Nuxt content version 3 is going to have a lot of really awesome functionality as well, which I can't wait to check out. Finally, the last thing I really want to touch on before we go to questions is you can have multiple layouts. So you can see within here we have a changelog layout, which is a kind of like an infinite scroll of all the different changelogs. But then the blog layout is slightly different. So you can load up your blog layout, and you can have these different layouts all set up and ready to go in your Nuxt content install. And when you go to your front matter, which we talked about, all you have to do is define the layout as blog. So that allows you to be really flexible with what you're doing with Nuxt content, and really help shape the site based on how you want it to look, feel, flow, and function. With that, I really greatly appreciate the time, and if there's any questions, I would love to answer them.
There are definitely questions.
Okay.
Yay.
I'll do my best.
All right. First one. Will there ever be a point when hot reloading content in production will be possible? Or will it always need to rebuild the project when we need to update something?
So I don't know if version 3 is going to have it. We'll find a little bit more out tomorrow. Our flow is we always run a build server. So we always rebuild the project when you need to update something, and deploys it to the production install. we do a static site generation. So anytime we do make a change and we hit deploy, our CI process will rebuild it. So that's just the way that we approach it. I don't know if hot reloading content will be possible.
Good to know. Thank you. What is the best way to I18N/localize Nuxt content?
I believe there's a module that helps support that as well. And you can, that's from, if you go to Nuxt modules, you should be able to find one that will work within Nuxt content.
Sweet. Thank you. I'm curious, how would you handle version control and edits? Do clients edit the websites that you make and then have them Nuxt contents? Who edits these sites, and how do you manage Git and deployment?
That's a very good question. So there is a professional tool or a pro level tool called Nuxt Studio, which will help with this. For us being like a smaller team, we branch everything. Since Nuxt content is all in Markdown, we make a branch for a new post, make a branch for a new piece of content. We run it in a preview mode, and then, okay, once that's all ready, then we merge it back into the main branch. So we can protect based off of branches, which may be a little bit challenging for larger teams, especially those that don't know like much about Git. For that, I'd probably recommend Nuxt Studio, which is a paid for product by the Nuxt team and gives you a GUI to manage everything.
Thank you. And another question on internationalization, on how to handle within Nuxt content for bilingual landing page, for example.
Let me see if I can pull up that module, but it's I believe the module will help do all the internationalization support, even for landing pages and along with your content.
Okay, sweet. And then any plans about adding SPA support like in version 1 of Nuxt content?
That one I don't have the answer to. I know that version 2 requires server-side rendering support, which I think is a good idea, just because when you're dealing with content, you probably want it picked up by a search engine for the most part. With SPA support, it's not, you're not getting the pre-rendered content in the hands of a search engine easily. I don't know if version 3 will add SPA support, but I would guess that they wouldn't. Just a gut feeling.
Fair enough. If I use a component to composite a bunch of SVGs for a blog hero image, can I just point OG image or that component in front matter, and will it take care of rendering that?
So what we do is, if you have a custom OG image and you if you have a composite, a bunch of SVGs for a blog hero, and you want it to be a custom OG image, you can override the generated OG image on the page, even if you're using the OG image plugin. So on our homepage, like for Financial Freedom, which is one of our open source products, we have a special kind of like more marketing type fancy OG image that isn't generated by the OG image plugin, where all the data, like the content ones, are dynamically generated, and that allows us to like quickly change headers and change little like previews and not worry about making a whole new image for it. So you can definitely make your own custom image.
Sweet, thank you. Last question. Is it possible to use Nitro Server API to generate feed content into Nuxt content?
You can use the Nitro Server API to do pre-rendering if you go into the right hooks. And I haven't used it to do any generate content for Nuxt content, but you could definitely make that happen. I've used the Nitro Server API to send emails from a Nuxt content install, but never to generate, but I'm sure you could do that.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dan. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was a great time.
All right, y'all. We have a quick snippet about the Mastering Nuxt special. All right. Building with Nuxt is already fun, but if you want to take your Nuxt skills further, you're in for a treat. The Mastering Nuxt course is now just $154, down from $269 when you use the code NUXTNovember. This is the lowest we've ever offered, and it's perfect for anyone looking to get into the details of building powerful apps with Nuxt. Don't miss out. Head over to masteringnuxt.com before the offer ends. And again, that's masteringnuxt.com. And you can get a course preview by entering your email and just take a look through here. And look, it's Daniel Rowe. We're going to talk to him next. That's exciting. You can build awesome websites. So definitely take a look at this with masteringnuxt.com. And yes, since we're talking about Nuxt, we're going to hear from the leader of the Nuxt core team about magically optimizing your fonts. Daniel has a remarkable background of having previously served as CTO of a SaaS startup. His contributions to open source community have made a significant impact, and he's a sought-after speaker for conferences worldwide. Get ready to learn from one of the best in the business. Welcome to the stage, Daniel.